Mary Beth Janerick with Wasatch Community Gardens, here to talk a little bit about preparing your potatoes for planting. So when you are going to plant potatoes, there are a couple of things to know about preparing your seed potatoes. You're going to go and purchase your seed potatoes, certified disease-free at a nursery or one of the big box store garden centers. And when you get your potato, it'll probably look like this. It'll be dirty, that's totally fine. You don't want to wash off the dirt. And it may or may not have these visible eyes. We've all seen eyes on our potatoes when we've bought potatoes to eat and we don't get to them right away and they start sprouting in our kitchen. If they don't have any eyes, you can allow them to sprout or eye up at your house just by laying them on a plate or on the countertop or in a tray for 10 days or so, and they will start to produce these nice eyes. And what you don't want to do is let them get to this stage. So this has gone too far. This sad little potato spud is rotten, and this is not going to do well for you. Here's another example of something that I would not recommend choosing. This is also a really old potato which has sprouted. So you think, well, maybe I could plant it. It might do okay, but it's not going to produce the healthiest, most robust and productive plant. It's already super soft. So you want to look instead for a nice firm tuber and allow it to eye up. Now, when you go to plant your potatoes, you don't have to plant this whole entire seed potato to make just one potato plant. You can get more bang for your buck by cutting this large potato into multiple smaller pieces. But there are some tips and tricks that are important to know on how to do that. On each piece of your potato, you're going to get a nice sharp knife and you will sanitize it. We all have our Clorox wipes at the ready these days. You're going to want to make sure that each piece of your potato has at least 2 eyes. So you're going to have to examine every tuber and see where those eyes are. So on this one, you could just come straight across and you've just cut your potato. Now you have 2 pieces that you can plant for the price of 1 potato tuber. So that's really nice. Now, you want to make sure that each one of your pieces weighs about 2 ounces. For example, if you took this piece and there were eyes all over it and you just kept cutting it and cutting it and cutting it into smaller and smaller pieces, and I have seen people do this, there's not enough stored energy in these tiny little pieces to make a really robust, healthy plant. So these tiny little pieces that just weigh, you know, half an ounce to an ounce are not what you're striving for. What you're striving for instead is something that weighs about 1.5 ounces to 2 ounces per piece with 2 eyes. Now this has really just 1 eye, so this would be less than ideal, but it's probably still going to work. The next step is really important, and that is to let the cut wounds that you've just created on your potato scab over. So I've done that for you on a couple of these that I cut a day or 2 ago, and you can see that instead of this wet, fresh wound, they have started to scab over. So it feels kind of dry and rubbery. And this is like any other scab, like even on a person's skin. This is protective. If you were to plant this in the ground right now, it would be very vulnerable to soil-borne pathogens, whether bacterial or fungal. And we certainly don't want to put our potatoes at risk. So you want to let these just sit in the air in your cool area at home and let them scab over for about 3 days. These have only scabbed over for about 1 day, so they will be protected now from bacterial infections, but they're not quite protective yet from fungal infections. So it's really important to let these go ahead and scab over before putting them in the ground. So here we have a 4-foot wide bed, and although ideally potato rows should be about 30 inches apart, we're actually going to try to press the boundaries a little bit here and put them about 22 inches apart. So the idea is to take a hoe or a shovel, whatever garden tool works for you, and to make a trench about 6 inches deep in your bed so that you end up with a nice trench for planting your potatoes. And you're going to hill this soil up on both sides. Then, if you have not already amended your soil, you can go ahead and sprinkle some compost in the bottom of your row. If you've already previously worked compost into your soil, this is not a necessary step to repeat. This bed has not yet been fertilized, however, and fertilizer is very important for your potatoes. In this case, we're going to use just nitrogen in the form of blood meal, and we're going to go ahead and just lightly sprinkle some blood meal into the bottom of the trench. The application rate will be written on the back of the package, and you can fertilize your entire bed and work that all in which case you would use 2.75 pounds of blood meal for 100 square feet of garden soil. In this case, we've just added some right into the bottom of the trench, and we're just going to work it in. You could also work it in with your hoe so that it's all incorporated. So now it's time to actually put your potato tubers in the ground. We've already talked about how to cut your potato tubers and make sure that they're nicely scabbed over so that they're resistant to any bacterial or fungal pathogens in the soil. And you're just going to put them about 6 inches deep with the eyes up and the flat cut side down. And we're going to go about 15 inches apart in the row because our rows are only about 22 or so inches apart instead of the more preferable distance of 30 inches apart in your row. So we're going to compensate a little bit by spacing the potato tubers out in the row. We're also going to label the variety. So these are Kennebecs, and we want to put our tag in here so that we can differentiate our Kennebecs when they sprout from our other seed potatoes. So when we get to Red Thumb, we'll put another tag in the ground, and I'll come down here, and this would be where I would put my fingerling. We did not cut these particular potatoes because they're so small. Then, once you've got your potatoes placed all the way down your row, you simply backfill your potatoes with using the soil from your mound until they're about 2 inches deep in the row. One other thing that I'm doing here is adding a little bit of peat moss on top of the potatoes that we put in, because this soil is really quite heavy. It's a heavy clay soil. It has been amended, but it's still pretty tough for us at harvest time to dig in here and find all the tubers easily. Peat moss is a really nice organic amendment, and we have found here that it does a really nice job when mixed with our native soil. So we're just adding a little bit of peat moss and mixing it in. Of course, the potatoes are under here, and we'll continue to use soil and peat as we build up, and it'll make harvest so much nicer. And we will continue to backfill these potatoes in the row as the plant begins to grow. It is now May 12th, and we planted these potatoes on April 13th. So you can see that they've come up from about 3 inches down, and now they have all this beautiful green growth above ground. And what we're going to want to do now is what's called hilling up. your potatoes will grow up along the stem, and you don't want them exposed to the sunlight. You want them to stay underground. So when we originally planted, we had a mound down the center and a mound on each side. We're now going to take the mound and literally, you can use a hoe or a trowel. You don't have to use your, paws, but you can just hill up around and sort of push the edges and the center in and make a nice little hill around your potatoes. Now, when we planted, we also used some peat moss. This is a really beautiful organic soil amendment, and it can make digging up your tubers later really a lot easier as well. So feel free to also use some peat moss in addition to your soil. And of course, the ever-present weed challenge. Make sure you're pulling your weeds. Just use some peat and some soil, or just soil, that's totally fine. And you're just gonna make a nice mound around your potato plants. You will do this again at least one more time as they continue to get taller. So you'll have a nice mound of soil going down the center of your row with trenches in between your rows. I hope that makes sense. Thanks so much for joining us on this much more pleasant day here at Wasatch Community Gardens campus.